I'm Randy Hoteling, also known as Calvary. So I made maps for Red Faction. I hope you still enjoy them. A sci-fi first-person shooter set on Mars that allows you to modify the environment as you're playing. As a design of the gameplay. It was revolutionary then, and it really is still revolutionary now to some degree. I would say blow shit up. That's what I would say, frankly. I knew of Red Faction because I knew of Descent and Parallax, Outrage, Volition. And I've played all those games. I loved them. Even dabbled a little bit with Descent 2 in the editor, very unsuccessfully. I had a friend who was into it more, and he made a couple levels we would play. Back when you'd have to dial up, into each other's computers to play. But I was really interested in Red Faction. I think that came out after Free Space, I believe. So I really enjoyed Free Space. I loved it. Free Space 1, 2, and the expansions. So when they announced Red Faction, I'm like, yeah, first-person shooter from Volition. I'm all in. Went up and did my pre-order at Best Buy. Got my soundtrack. I played it. I loved it. Like I said, I'm a public servant, and I started my public service a long time ago, way back in the 90s, dispatching for my local police department. So I was a 911 dispatcher. And, I'd work a lot of midnight shifts, evening shifts, and they'd encourage you to stay awake. So whatever we would do, so we game, So by the time Red Faction had come out, I had moved on and actually gone into doing within the state of civil service and HR work for the governments. But I always kept that job dispatching. So being the part-timer, it was the midnight shifts, it was the weekends. So I was playing a lot of Red Faction at work. I had time. They were paying me to play. Now pause. Can I send an ambulance your way, please? What do you need? The Levels for You community. Way back then, that seemed to be when you would search online. In the early days of the internet, all signs for Red Faction seemed to point to Levels for You. That there was a robust community there. It was a way to get new maps. Like, oh my God, we can add maps. So it was around that time that I was starting with the editor. So if I had questions, I would just post them there. It was such a welcoming community. I really didn't, obviously in the modern days, the internet trolling and people, just being hateful, really. I didn't experience that, and it was a welcome experience. I interacted with several clans through the Levels for You. I was actually thinking recently about it. There was one called Corpses Inc. I think it was a gentleman and his wife, if I recall, and they would have like their friends of their little gaming community, and actually made one map inspired by one of my friends, but for their gaming clan. And there are others. You saw a lot online, but I think, I had a group of friends that, we would play Red Faction, including my brother who also did some maps. So we didn't have a clan per se, but I had a group of friends I constantly played with. But me and my brother were the only ones who did some maps. But we would interact with other mappers. We would make, I think one map we made with a mapper called Eastbeer. And I don't know his real name. But he did quite a bit. I think Nicky's cable car. Nicky, yeah, that was it. And my interaction with him, offline was great too. I think just as a passive community member, not like Levels for You. I think they were another gaming community that kind of centered around Red Faction. I think that there was a clan maybe, and they shared files. I think it's just one of those. Like for me, really, the hub was Levels for You, and I think they were tenuous connections going out to different places, but Levels for You was the gold standard as far as I'm concerned. I actually got to interact with Jay Goldberg, who was the community manager at Volition, at least during Red Faction Guerrilla. I think maybe earlier than that, because they had done that Make an Achievement contest for Red Faction Guerrilla, and I won that. I created the multiplayer achievement High and Mighty, putting a remote charge on somebody, blowing them up in the air. If that, I got this little guy. So, and a bunch of other swag he sent. A copy of the game. I think some freeze-dried NASA ice cream. Stuff like that. So it was neat, and he was a great guy to deal with. I think the PC version, because I played on PC, was delayed. So he said, like, it's coming, you'll get it. And then, ironically, I ran into him at PAX East in Boston. I live in New York, so I ran into him in Boston. And I introduced myself, and we kind of just chatted and reminisced for a little bit. I think they did support the community well. If you remember back then, there was no auto patching. You had to go get a patch and download it, and make sure you carried it around with you when you're reinstalling it at work and stuff like that. So obviously they were invested in their product, and I think they did a good job supporting the community. I never found, like, when I did participate in their actual website community, their forums there, I didn't find it to be toxic at all, because it was well moderated, and I think that was really my first experience with Jay, because he did a great job at that. In college, I was an art minor. More of the physical media, mixed media, pre-digital, showing my age now. So I thought around that time, like, I really would like to see what digital art is like. And just a whim, I'm like, let me try this editor. It's kind of, I could be artistic with it. You see and so I would actually sit there dispatching, going through tutorials. I would print off the internet at home or bring over in a binder, and okay, this is how you make a brush, airbrush, solid. So that's how I started, and I immediately fell in love with it. I didn't. However, after in the post-Red years, I actually tried a little bit at Source Engine, and for some reason I just didn't grasp it as well as Red. I really enjoyed Red, because obviously they're set up different. Where in Source, you're creating the solid and taking away from it or adding to it or whatever. Where in Red, and I presume because of the Geomod technology, it assumes that you're working within a solid and you're adding space. And that to me made more sense. Well, I think maybe only because that's what I learned. If it'd gone the other way, who knows? I would have maybe said, I'm not Red, but like Red. Yeah, I think initially Volition, didn't they provide some Red groups that you could download? So I had those. Probably still, I have it was funny, I have my files just from 2004, right there. Probably still has everything on, the patches, the EB Games level, you could got as a pre-order, and was another one from GameStop, maybe, weren't they separate at the time? I don't know. So I did, obviously learn from community members, by either asking questions or opening up the editor and looking at their levels, like how they do that, and sometimes you do like, well, where's the secret? There's going to be a secret somewhere in this level. So you look. But there were, outside the levels few, there were some other pages I found online that were kind of one-offs that were like building your first room in Red Faction, and using Red. So, and I literally would print that out and I go through the steps. But, once you exhaust those limited resources out there, the levels few community, for me at least, kind of became like the gold standard. This is what I'm going to for my information. It was funny back then, with your email, the attachment size was very limited. So it'd make these maps, and then, like, the day before we play, I'm running over their houses like with a CD, like, here, copy this file. I was doing my weekly trek around town to distribute files before you can actually really attach them on email. Absolutely. Have you interviewed Rex yet? I remember playing those maps, and like, this guy's raising the bar. He is raising the bar. Like, every time one will come out, you're like, something new. Like, wow, that's neat. Or that's an interesting way to have a secret in a level. I remember my mind was blown. He's like, he got music to loop. How do you do that? So, you open, unpack the file and you look at it like, okay, there's that. and you'd recreate them in your level. You know, so I don't know if he thought of it himself and figured it out or got it from somebody else, but you're always learning something new from that guy. You know, it was a mechanic within the game that they used um, when you needed to use it. But I mean, you could turn around towards mostly any wall, you know, and blow it up. So you'd always experiment. But when it came to the mapping, you know, obviously sometimes you want something to blow up, sometimes you don't, because you had to think about if it blow up too much, hey, someone's not going to have fun, or you know, they can't get to where they need to go. So obviously you had to, you know, as I developed, I was more thoughtful about the geomod in the game, and to the hints where the geomod would be if you know if it was actually discrete areas that were geomod, you know, you put a decal or whatever, you know. Well, you know, it's like you would want someone to do it for you. So, and I think that's it. You know, if you have something that you could help somebody else out, you do it. And now it's funny you mentioned that because I think that the fighter was in the red groups provided by Volition, but when you used it, it didn't load because it couldn't find the texture. So I actually went through the game files and found the texture and showed it that way. That's so people could actually download it and put it into their if they want to use that fighter. Yep. Wow, it's funny. It's like a blast from the past. Thank you. Yeah, I just get shot a lot. I'm easy. I'm an easy target. It was like my, you know, in the military, someone's like, I'm an ensign first class. I'm just RFCF. I'm just Red Faction Cannon Fodder. Yeah. Yeah, I always wanted to make them at least aesthetically pleasing. I mean, functional for gameplay, like never have any dead ends, you know, where players could just kind of loop around. Always give a player an escape. Um, didn't know if I could accomplish that all the time, but I also wanted to be aesthetically pleasing. So that would actually drive some of the things that I did. My first one was Nikal, and when I did it, I'm like, great, this is awesome. I know how to do this. But after having three or four, five, six maps under my belt, I realized how ugly that level was. You know, it was just too boxy. You know, you're basing everything on a box at that point, not really extruding faces or changing the vertices. So that's when I did Nikal Redux. And I'm like, let me take the concept that I had at the time I was making that first level, and how would I do that today? And it's actually one of the levels I'm very proud of, that one, Nikal Redux. I thought that was one of my better concepts. Um, and I really enjoyed in that one. My favorite part of it, I think, is because it's inside it. Now it's no longer open to the sky. It was inside a cavern, but I wanted to have the sky visible to some degree to let them know there was the sky out there. And I made these like turbines in the roof, and it was just so neat because they're up. You see them moving up there, but as you're up in the up part level on some girders or some walkways, you hear the woof, 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 woof. It's just, you know, there's a little subtleties in the level that you like. You know, you try to be aesthetic and visually pleasing at the same time. You know, provide an environment people can have fun in. Out of the blue and into the black, where it's actually the same level. It just changed the music and the lighting. So it was more of a day one and a night, and I just wanted to change the tone of the level. So I tried to be a little artsy and aesthetic with what I was doing. Um, and I think actually in that one, you know, because Free Space was a Volition game, I would unpack their files out of that game too and use their textures. So I think I used some textures from that game. Yeah, I think others probably did that as well. Well, you know, like I said, I try to be a little artistic, you know, and I thought like, no, and again, because all these were deathmatch levels, and then sometimes you think, you know, capture the flag, whatever. I always try to think two sides to a map. So I thought, like, what if there was two, I guess, identical maps, like kind of like surrounded by a portal, you know, and that was like Looking Glass, and like Alice in Looking Glass, and that's where that comes from, you know, Alice in Wonderland. So I created that, but then if I recall, I created it to where you go in one and they kind of wrap around. They don't actually touch each other, but there is a way to like to go up through the middle, like to the top somehow. And that's what it actually was. That the first one with the rotating billboards. So I want again, like I wanted to make a mover where the image changed, and that was my way of doing it, was creating, a billboard made of three-sided columns that would just rotate like a rotating billboard and just change the picture. I just want to create like a Western themed town, kind of a Western feel to it. And I, called it Tull. And actually, again, going back to Rex being inspirational. If you look in that map, there's one building you can't get in. It's called like Lilliputian Saloon, like Lilliputian. So I do have like a microfaction inspired map, which it's okay. Called Tull Saloon. So that's out there as well. So that's where that comes from. Me and my brother and Eastbeer, which I believe he was over from the UK, we did a map together. Like I would start it and I'd pass it to him, and we keep passing around, just doing different tweaks. And then that's how that one came into life. We basically hooked up in the community. We were like responding to different threads and sharing information. And then like through emails, like, do you want to do a map together? Sure, let's do a map together. It's just like do those things you pass around, and see what inspiration you can take from what you get, and see what you can do with it, and pass it around to somebody else. I think we had intended on being a little bit bigger than it was then, with more members, but it was kind of like, let's just start and see what happens. Again, just the name. It was started out as a train depot. Then it really just became two sides of a city with a structure in the center. And that comes from Stephen King as well, that title. So I was kind of inspired by the title there from the Wastelands, the Dark Tower series. GTVA is obviously the one of the factions in the storyline of Free Space. So, and I recently extracted those textures from there, and that's where I used the fighter model group, and really just created a upside down level. Like, what can you do in an upside down world? So that actually is a spaceship, kind of derelict, floating upside down. So all the rooms are like the doors are up here. So you got to actually use a lot of geomod to shoot between the rooms. One of the rooms I made was like anti-grav, so I made an entire climb region, so you could just move up and down in it like it's anti-grav. And then there was I believe a docking bay that would open up and drop people into space, into the skybox, if they went to it and someone hit a certain button, and it would do it. So that was the inspiration of that one, kind of like the Poseidon Adventure movie. My last level was just a batons only level, Syncopated Pandemonium, and I really tried to push myself as how much can you do with as few brushes as possible. And if you ever play that level, the center column and all the walkways, I believe is one brush. I just extruded the faces and kept moving around and moving them up. So it was like a little challenge to myself. So I like to be a little artistic, because I think that's why I wanted to get into it. It was as a form of expression. Having played Looking Glass, there's a lot of images that are from Storm Thurgeson, or Pink. No, the guy who does the art for Pink Floyd did the art for Pink Floyd before he passed. It was kind of inspiration from Roger Waters' Radio Chaos album cover. It was funny. I read a description of one of my maps, which made me remember it. Like a signature room, like the camera would snap to at the end of the game when it showed the totals. Like actually, I used to use like a radio tower with like sound waves coming from it as like my signature, because that was my avatar at the time on Levels for You. So I made a 3D version of that in its own little room that the camera would snap to at the end. So I think in the later levels, I had that in there. From a mapper and community member, it was something to look forward to, that there's a new wave of maps coming out. There's going to be something new, so it was almost like, Christmas. You just like, hey, a bunch of maps to play. So I, again, put them all on disc, run around town to my friends, like, this is what we're playing tonight. So we try them out and have fun. It was funny. I had a conversation with a friend who saw him last night, and we were talking about it. And he was mentioning, like, do you remember that map? Do you remember that map? I'm like, oh, yeah, that one. And one he remembered was Spin Rail. Like, it was a beer can in the center. It was just all rail map. And it was fun. He loved that one. It was just one of the ones he loved. And then he remembers one that was inspired by the old Interplay game Redneck Rampage. had like the sound bites from that in like a trailer park or something. And for some reason, he just loved that one too. So it was nice reminiscing with him last night about it. There'd be a kind of a call for entries for new maps, to put out there, and there'd be a suite of judges. I don't even know who judged them, or at the time I probably did, but I don't recall now who judged them. Or maybe it was due to community feedback as well. But it was basically a call for new maps. Like, let's make a map and show us what you can do, and we'll judge them. And I think they probably played them one by one. Had a criteria and they rated them. Like I said, from a community member, I always look forward to looking and see that new maps are out there, and watching that thread, and see who's submitting what. And at the end, I did submit one, and that was the one that I said I tried to push myself to see how much can I do to make an enjoyable experience with as few brushes as possible. Because I really wanted to push the editor and my knowledge of the editor, and that's why I like all the extruding faces and moving them and moving the vertices to make all those ramps in that center column there. I like Rex's maps, although the microfractions weren't my favorite. Sublevel 17 was, because again, he just took something so simple and made it new to the community. And I think it was more the Z-axis fighting. It was more up and down instead of out. So I'm like, this guy's always thinking out of the box, literally, just something different. Lobby was nice. The lobby there. Office Space was a classic. Watch Your Step. That was, I think, was one of like the pre-order bonus levels. Yeah, I always like those. Yeah, absolutely. Only because I think they were more compact, and it was more in your face. Well, two things. I liked the weapon, and I was disappointed when it wasn't brought back in subsequent games. And I had a friend who really loved it as well. So I made the one map was a Coliseum, and this is actually a friend I was talking to last night, and he actually mentioned this map. I made it because he was into Gladiator. He loved the movie Gladiator at the time, and so I made it. I want a Coliseum. I'm like, okay, make a Coliseum. And again, that was really I was kind of a precursor to what can I do by creating a brush and then moving the vertices out. So that entire thing is one brush, and I moved the vertices and moved it out. And he liked the rail. So I made one version of it that kind of with connection to the Corpses Inc. clan, and so they could use it. And then I made the rail only version for my friend because he wanted one. So that's how that came to be. I think I used a skybox from Counter-Strike for that one too, the first Counter-Strike. First off, to make it would be personal to me, it's not even the mapping. It was the fun times I would have with my group of friends in our weekly frag fest. Let's just have fun this one night of the week. Our jobs are our jobs. This is what we're doing this night. And we actually took that same group of friends and moved on to different games. We did a lot in Medal of Honor, Allied Assault, and all of its expansions for a long time. We would play those maps, and we actually at that point we had rented a server and had the rotation going up. And it was funny because we would start doing teams, and the one night it was back. We started getting the headsets, the microphones, and we got it primarily just so we wouldn't bothering our wives. Our wives wouldn't hear us. And hear the. So, but then the group of us on the assigned team that let's try voice chat. So we were communicating. The other team wasn't because we didn't do it then, and we really kicked their ass. And then at one point they're like, they're cheating. They're on the phone or something. So it just those experiences with friends, and how do you beat that? I enjoyed the mapping. I enjoyed the community, and just like I said, being blown away by seeing what other people could do. I mean, it really pushed you. Like, okay, see what I can do now. I played through a single player, and I would play through that game back after I'd end it. A couple days later, I started all over again. I loved it, absolutely loved it. And I think because in my mind, I think wasn't it initially to be a spiritual successor to Descent or Descent 4. I think that's the way it was initially planned. So yeah, I mean, it's just, it was from a series of games I loved from developers where I've loved all their games. So I would just play it over and over again. And it really was that inspiration of, let me see, let me get back into doing art. I'm like, well, what's this editor all about? I did some research online and found some, literally found some tutorials, print them out at home. And I'd be, working like 3 o'clock in the morning, answering 911 calls and the police pulling people over, and I'd be editing, making maps, learning the editor. Around 2003, I'm guessing, don't hold me to this. So early 2000s, I actually just transitioned from working for county government to the state government in a new job where I was doing budgeting work, which, gotta tell you, budgeting work is terrible. Don't do it. But I used it as a transition within the civil service system. Say, I'll do it for a year, then I'll transfer back into doing HR work somewhere for another state agency. That's kind of where my career path went. So I was really focused on career then, because I took a big cut in pay to go to the state from the county level, and had 2 young kids at the time, and just working extra hours at the police department, trying to make ends meet. So I think my life focus shifted a little bit. Not so much as I did in the Red Faction community. Like I said, I did dabble a little bit with Source because I liked the art direction of Team Fortress 2. I thought that was I just like that. I thought it'd be neat to create a levels with this art direction, with this color palette and inspiration of 1950 sci-fi kind of tone. So I took a stab at it. I no great success there. At the same time, Valve did a contest for those who weren't technically adept in their Source engine. And it was the time they were rolling out the Manco catalog. Do you remember the Manco catalog? And they had the hat description contest. So if you weren't technically adept in anything that Valve did, but you could describe a hat, that's how you threw your hat in the ring, no pun intended, was to get into their community. So I was actually the one who wrote the description for Bill's hat. Bill from Left 4 Dead. The description says, "Left for you. You're welcome." I played them all. Well, I didn't play the N-Gage version or that, or any mobile version. Because why would I? No, 1, 2, Guerrilla, and Armageddon with the DLCs. I still think my favorite, I think because at the time it was just blew my mind, was still the first one. I did enjoy Guerrilla. I think there's a tenuous connection of I created an achievement for this and a little bit of pride, which I got to say, I've never got that achievement because I don't know. I think by the time I got done playing the single player, I don't know, there wasn't much of a multiplayer community online at that point for that particular game. It was just me. Or maybe it was because it was through Games for Windows Live. I think that was probably one of the bigger artificial barriers to that game. I got more emotionally attached to the story for what it was in the first one. I think because, again, it was just building on a good set of games from a company that I liked. So I'm always good for supporting the company or the franchise. I even bought Red Faction 2 on GameCube. And then I also bought Red Faction Guerrilla for my Switch. Ended up not playing it. And a friend was buying a Switch for his son for Christmas. Here, give him this game. You can play this. Because I knew I ultimately wouldn't play it. I was really wanted to throw my support behind the franchise so they would make more. Just my little bit of helping out to say, hey, there's a demand for this franchise. Based on your email, I've reinstalled. I got Dash Faction up and running. I'm loving it, and I've reinstalled all the games. So I'm taking actually a solo journey through all of them, and now I'm dating myself because I started the first Red Faction yesterday, and I'm running through the mines, going for a good half hour, and I died, and I realized I got to start over because I didn't save it. I'm like, what happened to checkpoint saves? When did they come into play? I think it could have, because I think that, like myself, there's probably a group of gamers who, because back then you followed games made by the companies you liked. And you're like, what are they doing next? What are they working on now? Back in the infancy of the internet, news was hard to come by. So you would try to find out. Um, I think without Geomod, the game would still would have stood on its own, in the story that it had and the level design and the art direction. Um, I don't think it would have had the community it had. So I think that people really said, "No, what can I do with this? This is fun." I think it could. I think it could if given the opportunity. It's just, you know, companies are probably a little more risk adverse because back then it was a small group of people dedicating their own, probably sometimes their own money and their own time into it. But now it's obviously things are now more conglomerate. Decisions are made based upon what the finance office says. So I don't know if someone's going to take the risk to do it, but I think it could be a success.